Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the BimTube podcast. So today I'm joined by Jeremy Murfitt, who I've known for at least a decade. So welcome, Jeremy. Thank you for joining me.
Morning.
Yeah, thank you. And today we're going to talk about different themes. We're obviously going to touch on drones, geospatial. For the benefit of people who haven't seen or listened to a podcast before, it is called BimTube. Slightly confusingly, I mean better information management, not necessarily BIM. We talk about digital data, enabling technologies, and all the rest of it, whatever we want to talk about. But there's the theme, and today the theme will obviously be around elements of survey, remote sensing, and geospatial, because that's what Jeremy works in. So, Jeremy, please, if you wouldn't mind to introduce yourself for the audience, and also what I think is interesting to people is also your background. So how did you get into the role that you have now? So over to you, Jeremy.
I'm a chartered surveyor. I originally qualified in agriculture, having gone to Cirencester. Stayed in agriculture for literally a few years and joined Tarmac Roadstone up in Matlock. And the reason was they had big agricultural holdings. And I very quickly started to enjoy minerals work. So I progressed through Tarmac, left them after about 6 years and joined English China Clays. I was based in Leicestershire, but a Cornish-based mining company. That, through various amalgamations, company takeovers and acquisitions, eventually became a company which is known today as Aggregate Industries, one of the big 5 players in the UK. I landed up being property director, and I looked after the American portfolio and the UK portfolio, which was about 600 operations across those 2 countries. I left them in 2008 and went to my own. And during that process, I was always interested in GIS when I worked in the corporate world. So I carried on doing GIS type work in the private sector, along with other professional planning work, property management. And in 2015, I had a client who rang me up and said, I need some pictures of a property I'm about to sell. Can you find something to get some drone shots? And that was in the early days of drone work. So I thought, I can do that. I used to have a pilot's license. So literally 6 weeks later, I done the course, got the t-shirt, got the drone, and I took the pictures for him. Moving on to 2023, that's probably now about 60 to 70% of what I do is drone related work, and very much still integrated with GIS.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. And it's that integration, isn't it? Of course, we've met originally through GIS and Association for Geographic Information and others, but it is this intersection that I'm interested to how, the workflow, which maybe we'll get onto, but just as an overview. So I assume most people know what drones are, or UAVs or UASs, whatever we're supposed to call them nowadays. But can you just describe the typical use cases that your typical clients? I know you're touching on some clients there, but yeah, a typical use case would be great in your scenario.
So if you take the drone market generally, there are a lot of people doing sort of marketing type work, sales particulars for estate agents, weddings, all those type of events. I very much wanted to focus on more of the, as far as I could, the more of the specialist area. So I started off doing property related videos. Sometimes they were for sales particulars. Sometimes they were more focused on buildings. That led me into doing more and more roof surveys. Classic thing, a drone can inspect a roof pretty quickly and cost effectively compared with scaffolding and cherry pickers. And I started also doing quite a lot of construction updates for builders. So these were regular monthly or bi-monthly or even fortnightly visits to record what was happening on a construction site. And predominantly they were for like the directors sitting in the board meeting. They could view all their sites from the warmth of their boardroom and see what was going on. Over that period, I also then started to get into photogrammetry. So this is where you can use a drone for collecting a lot of images of a site, which in short, you stitch all those together, which enables you then to create a 3D model of a property, which you can then do all sorts of things with. So I've very much focused on, in the last few years, on doing photogrammetry surveys, and that then leads on to things like cut and fill exercises, understanding materials handling on sites, doing volume checks, which all lends itself very much into tying that in with GIS. One of the key things with any drone work is collecting the data is comparatively easy. Drones are very, very capable. It's providing the data in the right format to the client so the clients can use it. That's what's really important, because no point producing some fantastic data, give it to the client, and he says, "What do I do with this?" So that's fundamental.
Great, yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I probably would have come onto that theme already, but you've talked up quite nicely about the outputs. And so, what are the typical outputs? Because again, maybe we'll come back to photogrammetry. I know you partly touched on it there, but again, for a non-specialist audience. But the outputs, one would assume, perhaps wrongly, that a 3D model is the output. But can you just give an overview of the kind of outputs that you deliver? Yeah.
A lot of projects, for example, if I'm looking at, say, typical case study, a client is selling a bit of land or an agent is selling some land, they want some stills for marketing materials and a video. So stills quite easily come out as JPEGs or in a PDF format, whatever format they want. And videos, I take the footage and I will edit it down to 2 or 3 minutes, because normally within 2 or 3 minutes you can get a bit of a feel for a property. I might do a roof survey, and again the same. You'll have stills, and you might land up with 300 or 400 stills on a complicated building or more. I've done a couple of jobs. I've done over 1,000 images and videos to go with it. So in terms of those type of jobs, it's either JPEGs or video. And I think what's important with the video, you edit it to make it condensed, add text, add some other information if you need to. The worst thing is to fly a big farm. It's taking you 20 minutes to fly around it and give the client a 20-minute video. It's quite boring. I think the key is to look at YouTube. You get a big property, you can show somebody the key parts of that property within a few minutes.
So it's the editing. Well, yeah, I was going to say, how do you, this might be a silly question, I guess, from experience, but how do you know what to show? So say if there's someone thinking, oh, I want to get into drone, how do you know what to edit? Is that through your experience, or is there a list of what the client is focused on, like asset groups or something?
Yeah, I rarely find that the client really knows what they want. And it's really from experience of doing quite a few, you land up knowing what they want. So if you're doing something like a roof survey, it's comparatively easy. You take pictures of every component part of the roof, every ridge, every gutter, all the detail. If you're doing a video, and I'm doing, for example, a small farm, 200 or 300 acre farm, of the video, probably 2/3 of it will be the farmhouse and the buildings. Because once you've flown around one field, they look like another field to a degree, and you can fly a lot higher. You can get an overview, is generally what most clients want, and you can condense that into a short video. I've had other jobs where clients buying a bit of land for development, so they are about to sit in the board meeting and they're going to decide whether they want to buy it or not. So instead of them trooping around the site, I will do a video of the site, and that would be a bit different because it might be an edge of town development, and say it's 50, 60 acres of agricultural land. Okay, they want to see the fields. That might take 20 seconds, 30 seconds, but then you want to show how those fields relate to the adjoining built environment. So I'd focus then on providing imagery which shows the development site relative to what's around it. So it varies from job to job.
Yeah, Sorry, Jeremy, I was just thinking that there's so many applications, aren't there? I mean, it's almost infinite if you think about it. I started my career with the UK central government in agri-environmental schemes, which is, doing ecological things for, obviously, for rural. I would imagine that could have been very useful at the time. This is obviously more than 20 years ago. Where site inspections, I didn't go out, but people were having to check the progress of different schemes, environmental management schemes, for example. You imagine what they could have done had they got drones. Is there something have you seen a trend in drones? This is sort of an open question now, particularly in construction, because I know there's lots of different domains, but have you seen a trend in the way the drones are used, or their capability is what I mean, so the technical capability as well?
Yeah, if you look at terms of general usage, I think if you took the American market, that they're more advanced than ourselves, and they adopted drones quite quickly. What I found, and other colleagues who are drone operators found, a lot of the UK companies were almost reluctant. It's new technology, we don't do it like that. So there was a lot of pushback when you first approach companies. And I've worked with people like Vinci, Panettone, some of the big shed guys. But once you show them the footage, once they see it, they say, gosh, I didn't realize you could see that amount of detail. I think people are generally surprised at the quality of the imagery they get. Even very small drones have got 4K cameras on them, so you can pick out phenomenal amounts of detail. So I think generally the construction sector was slow to do it, but I think in the last probably 2 years, a lot of the big operators have now got their own drone departments. So Atkins, the big consultancy practices, they've now taken on, and they're actually running their own drone teams because they realise the benefit of it. So that's probably the biggest trend.
Sorry, Jeremy, there's a delay. I talked over you. The construction side of it is one thing, and of course there's the budget and the clarity of purpose with projects. But and you've mentioned one example of roof inspections, which is by definition operations and maintenance. So have you, either directly through your work or just generally with obviously you'll meet with peers and go to events, no doubt based on these topics, have you seen it in more heavy infrastructure? I'm just personally interested because that's more my background. So for example, electrical distribution networks or railway. I know maybe you don't work in that, but have you seen that?
Yes. I've done pipeline work, which I'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, I've got colleagues who've done, for example, there's a new pipeline from Bacton Gasworks in North Norfolk running down through Norfolk into Suffolk, and that's quite a new, well, it is a brand new pipeline going in, and a colleague in Norfolk has been filming that regularly. So there's a major infrastructure job. He films it every few weeks. Another colleague did Leeds Bypass, filmed it every month for the whole contract. There's 2 or 3 guys who are very specialist in doing power cables, the big transmission lines. I know 1 or 2 people who specialize in wind turbines. So yeah, a lot of the big infrastructure jobs are now covered by various specialists. And there's 1 or 2 guys who specialize purely in oil rigs and gas rigs. They do all those offshore inspections. So yeah, it is becoming far more prevalent.
You mentioned that pipeline. Was that an example? You've done a pipeline project?
Yes, interesting one. It's a pipeline which runs across the UK. It carries fuel. Without saying where it is, it runs through part of the country where there's some gypsum workings. The gypsum workings are shallow, and the pipe is probably, they haven't got accurate records, but they think the pipe is probably 2 to 3 meters below surface. And the top of the mine working is probably only about 12 to 15 meters below that. And the mine working is collapsing. So along the line of the pipe, you've got stress cracks. And these cracks are probably 50 to 100 mil wide, running for sort of 50 to 100 meters on the side of the line. And also adjacent to the line, a big area of land is actually physically dropped by about 2 meters. So I'm surveying that on a regular basis, so I can tell them how much it's moved. That's a classic job where I can fly it and give them I can fly it. If they rang me up today, I could fly it today and give them the data tomorrow. That's where they like the speed of turnaround.
So thanks, Jeremy. That agility, this is where maybe, and I know there's other sort of set topics we could move on to, but I mean, maybe we'll come to the rules and regulations just after. If you just get me thinking about the process, maybe we could just jump ahead to the sort of the integration with GIS and the workflow. Well, I mean, I know you've just said it's quicker, but how much quicker is it? I mean, can you just describe the workflow or the process from actually taking data, so taking the primary data, and then how it's processed, how that happens and how long that takes? Because again, it's so quick. You just said the next day. That almost sounds unbelievable to some people that don't work in this area. So you just describe the workflow. That'd be great.
Just quickly before I do the workflow, I've forgotten HS2. HS2 is flown the whole route every week, if not twice a week, to manage all the materials. So they've got a fleet of drones running the whole of the HS2 route. Workflow. So if I was flying, for example, a pipeline route, and I don't know, it's a couple of kilometers long. Firstly, in this particular case, I'm familiar with the site, but I still do need to go out, and I will put what they call ground controls out, physical markers on the ground, which I survey in with a surveying station. And that might take me an hour to walk along that bit of route and probably put down 10 markers and checkpoints. The drone itself will fly that in, if I'm doing, say, a kilometre and a half, probably fly that in 2 sections. Each flight would be like 15-20 minutes. So within the space of 2 hours on site, I've got my ground markers and my checks. I've flown the site and I've got the data. I can then come back, load up that imagery into the processing software I use, and that might have taken, say, 600 or 700 images, and that will stitch it together and create a 3D model, probably in about 3 hours. So in the course of a day, I've captured the data, got the outputs, and then what I do is I normally take those outputs into 1 or 2 GIS software applications and do whatever analysis I need to do to then send that off to the client.
Great.
Just to give you another big example, I've done a big site for Urban and Civic a few times down near Rugby. That's 600 or 700 acres. Their surveying team, or the surveying company they wanted to use on the job, said that will take us about 10 days on the ground, 10 days, 2 weeks, with 2 two-man teams, and 3 weeks to process it. 2 of us flew it in a day and a half, and we turned the whole project around in 4 to 5 days. So that's where the big time savings come on some of those bigger, more complex jobs.
Thanks, Jeremy. I was just thinking about the time saving and how surveyors, you're a chartered surveyor, and I mean, without sounding like a loaded question, do you think some people see this as a threat, possibly? You know, it's just too efficient. Is it for some people, or do you think it's a positive thing?
Positive thing. The big surveying practices, and I work with quite a few of them, they saw this happening right at the beginning. So they've invested in drones. So they are doing anything from drones through to traditional surveying, through to LiDAR, laser scanning, the whole gambit from one end to the other. What clients get hung up on, which we'll probably come on to anyway, was accuracy. Because I've gone to jobs to do a muck shift volume, and the engineer on site that says, well, we need it in 4 mil, 5 mil accuracy. He said, well, you don't, you know, 20 to 30 mil or even 40, 50 mil is absolutely fine for doing a muck shift. And you said, speak to your own surveying department, and they do. And the surveyor said, well, we wouldn't capture it till 40 or 50 mil anyway, if we're doing a muck shift. So it's using drones for the right job. So if you do the muck shift or volumes, or you want general topography levels, use a drone. There is one caveat I'll come on to, which is vegetation. If you want to do setting out, and you want to set out to a few millimeters, you use a base station and the appropriate surveying kit. So it's a mix and match.
So you need the right tools. I mean, that is hopefully a theme that comes through the podcast generally, is there is a professionalism by definition with handling data, information of any description, but we're talking about a special case here, survey data and geomatics and geospatial data. And you need, and you will always need, I would assert, professionals at some point to check it or to set up the process. Because and you wanted to mention accuracy. You touched on that. If you do you want to elaborate? What I find interesting, and I'll just tell you, and maybe you can explain. Remember, the audience may or may not be specialists, particularly in survey. But I remember sitting in a conference years ago now, and someone, a more mature guy, said, "Oh, young people don't know the difference between precision and accuracy." And I was sitting there as a professional cartographer thinking, I wouldn't bet my life on it. So even though I knew, do you know what I mean? It's like, so I always think, well, why doesn't he just say? Do you know what I mean? Why doesn't he tell people? Maybe there are people early in their career who do get confused. Maybe they should know. But anyway, sorry. You will get, if you want to explain the difference between precision and accuracy, please do. But you also wanted to talk about accuracy.
Well, actually, in particular, the drones have got more and more capable over time, and you've now got drones which are what they call RTK enabled. So that effectively means the drone at any point in time knows where it is in 3D space, down to a few mil. So the resulting outputs are very accurate. But generally, if you're doing a site survey in X and Y, you're going to be accurate to 30 to 40 mil, and in Z you're going to be 40 to 60 mil, generally within that ballpark. So if you're commissioning drone work and the drone guy says, yeah, I can produce it to 2 or 3 millimeters accuracy, sorry, don't believe it. Unless it's one of the very specialist companies out there, and there are some who can do it to that level of accuracy, but that is a different sector to the muck shifting general volume work. 30 to 40 mil. And if you're a site engineer, those sort of levels of accuracy are absolutely fine. The one thing you need to be careful of over photogrammetry compared with LiDAR is that photogrammetry won't penetrate dense vegetation. So if you've got really thick grass or brambles or thick dense vegetation, your camera will see the top of that vegetation area and not bare ground. Now, LiDAR has the ability to penetrate some vegetation, not all. If you take, for example, wooded area, LiDAR will penetrate the canopy and pick up the forest floor, whereas photogrammetry is less reliable. So you just got to be careful what application you use for the type of survey you're doing.
Yeah, and that LiDAR, or again for the audience, the laser scanning element of it, and not just the imagery that we're talking about. Is that something you've used, or it's becoming more common? I guess back to our previous point, it just depends, right? It depends what people are capturing. But have you flown LiDAR?
No, I haven't got LiDAR kit. It's readily available. It's all out there. It's off the shelf these days. The price has come down quite a bit. Most of my clients, the type of work we're doing, photogrammetry works. I've had a couple of jobs where I've needed LiDAR. I've just bought those services in. Yeah, I mean, you are talking a lot bigger investment for LiDAR equipped drones. You might be spending 30 or 40,000, probably a bit more, to get a good drone set up.
Yeah, and it's that fact that you can hire it in. I remember being at the London Underground. This is a long time ago, at least 15 years ago, and they'd just got LiDAR, or they were renting or hiring LiDAR, and they were big. I mean, this is obviously different kit, but at that time, 15 years ago, there was no chance that was going on a drone. No way, you could barely pick the thing up. But now, I mean, you'll know better than I, but I would imagine they're very small.
There are a couple of companies. I mean, picking up on rail, there are a couple of specialist companies who are doing a lot of the UK rail infrastructure with LiDAR kit on drones. They've got approval from Network Rail. They can overfly live lines. I think they're flying about 20 meters up. with 100 megapixel cameras, and they are producing data to, I think, 1 to 2 mil accuracy. And they can do it in multiple times faster than Network Rail could do it with traditional surveying techniques.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because what it opens up is options. There was speaking with someone recently just about train-borne sensory equipment. You know, obviously inspection, that's advancing as well, and you can strap equipment onto a service train, onto a normal train. Now you've got the option of drones that we're talking about today. You think it's all these options of sensors. It becomes, I mean, the irony in my mind is eventually, just moving away from our topic today, just more generally, there's just becomes like too much data. You know, it can. This is the irony around BIM and the international standards ISO 19650. It could be there's too much information. Have you seen that maybe earlier in your career? Not now, because obviously you have your own company, but have you got any anecdotes or something you can mention about where there's either not enough information, drawings or survey, or too much? I mean, I've seen too much handed over. Have you got any examples?
I did one large site. It was, whatever it was, 500 or 600 acres, did a full survey of it. And the client wanted, they asked for photogrammetry, they wanted stills, they wanted video, and they wanted point cloud. So I processed all the data. The point cloud was pretty big. It was, I think, 700 or 800 million points, which for photogrammetry is not unusual. And you're getting 250 to 300 points per square meter. So you've got a good lot of accuracy. And on a decent workstation, you can load up that model and spin it around as quickly as you can move the mouse. You can do anything with it. You can do cross sections, you can do line of sight, you can do all sorts. The data set was probably about 8, 9 gigabytes. So I send it off to the client, and the client's engineer phoned me up the next morning, and I listed out what each data set included. And he said, why do I need 700 million points? Said, we only work with 5,000 normally. And this was, and I'm not going to name them, an international engineering consultancy who had no idea what a point cloud was. There were other departments within the group who did. So in the end, I very quickly, to keep him happy and keep the project moving forward, I just simply overlaid a grid over the top of the elevation model at, say, 10-meter intervals or 5-meter intervals, and just extracted the elevation data for it and sent it off to him. So he had something he could work with. And it wasn't until he spoke to colleagues within this same company of 40,000 employees, he found out there was a whole BIM team who just lived off point clouds. And it's funny that you do find some practices just don't have the experience of handling data sets, which I see as day-to-day data sets.
Jeremy, that's a good example. That was partly sort of the motivation of this podcast as well, because I know maybe not specifically point cloud, but it could be whatever geospatial data set. In my career, I've had similar experiences where, because we're so close to it, whatever the data is, in this case, we're talking about point cloud, some people don't even know what they are. So there is this skills gap. It's, you know, I'm in an unusual position because often my day job is trying to educate people. Is like, that's actually why I'm there. Like, people don't know, and it is challenging, isn't it? I mean, I mean, what do we do? What do you think the skills? What do you think? Say if we had a large budget and we could help the CICES and RICS, for the people overseas, the survey institutions based in the United Kingdom, and the TSA, Survey Association, what do you think we should upskill people in, particularly if they're earlier in their career, or if they're making transitions into more modern technology? Where do you think the skills gaps are? Is it awareness? Is it technical capability?
I think a lot of it is awareness. That, like a lot of things, technical capability just keeps on. The curve never seems to stop rising. You know, if you take GIS, when I first started to learn to use GIS, you think, well, how on earth do you work that out? And then all of a sudden you're having to do some form of Python coding, which I'm absolutely useless at. I'm just not into coding. You move forward 20 years and within your software you use, well, I use Art Pro, you can click a button and it does that particular task for you. And it's the same with managing point clouds, and it's the same with capturing data. The capturing the information, and to a degree, the manipulation of it has become so much easier. I saw a demonstration, I've forgotten where it was now, probably at the show we were at, of a point cloud which is being flown by a drone, overlaid with the Revit model, and that was done within minutes. So the engineer was looking at the Revit model and then seeing how far the actual physical construction had gone and comparing the two models. And it was fairly intuitive. Well, obviously, he was a skilled salesman, showed me how it was going to work. But nevertheless, somebody as a user instantly, within a few minutes, could grasp, well, that's what we've got today on the right-hand side of the screen, and that's what we're building on the Revit model on the left-hand side, and I'll bring the two together. And so a lot of it's awareness, understanding what this, all these fantastic bits of software can do. There's another one I've seen, typical LiDAR scanning. Have you ever been to a construction site and seen somebody with a hard hat with a camera on the head?
Once, I think, but I don't know what they were doing. Yeah.
Well, that's clever stuff they're probably doing. They've got a 3D camera, which they literally glue to a mount on their hard hat, and they walk around the site. And when they walk back to the office, they've got a full 3D model of what they've just walked through. And you think, that's impressive. So they've captured within an hour or two the whole of the inside of a building, just whilst they're walking around doing their day-to-day job. So somebody else has got access and can review that data and information.
Yeah, that passive capture, well, say passive, they were probably walking on purpose. But anyway, let's assume passive capture really fascinates me, because that's where it becomes, like you say, like you literally just said, a day-to-day activity. It's not, but it's getting that process right. It's getting the data quality right. I know you gave an example of the lasers scan, and maybe, but do you have another example, just a quick one of where people perhaps haven't got the right product, like another one, maybe the precision is wrong, or that was a good example of the laser scan you gave, but maybe so for example, again, I often see too many zeros. The precision is millimetric. Have you got another example, maybe on a more traditional drawing or something, where it doesn't look quite right? I'm just trying to get people to think that maybe they should question the information and products that we get given.
Another simple example, I was involved in a restoration of a building, which was old listed building, various works going on inside. So people have been to see the site, but you forget the detail. So in that particular job, I used, which a lot of viewers would have seen, Matterport, who do the internal sort of 3D doll's house models. Well, I went and did a couple of Matterport shots of the 3 or 4 rooms which were being restored. Took probably half an hour to do it, and then we got it on screen with the architect and with the client. So he was saying, "Why have we done this?" Well, we could show him. He said, "Well, we shot this an hour ago. This is why we've got a problem, because of this bit." We can, the architect was pointing to it. And on the other screen, this is the drawing, what we're trying to achieve. Those two ain't going to work. So that was very much a quick way of disseminating information to a client.
Yeah, it's that speed, isn't it? This is the same theme. And again, sorry to come back to the same theme. It's just I can't emphasize, I think, to people listening or watching, that the speed and sort of agility, or whatever the appropriate word is, of being able to capture data is that's what I often say, is maybe there are things that drones can do that are unique, but even if the argument is it's not a unique thing that they could do, because you could fly a helicopter, for example, it's cheaper, it's faster, and this is a huge business benefit. And one of the challenges, I think, in whether it's this sector or others, people often don't record that benefit. Money, you know what I mean? The actual savings. We'll come off that topic because I could talk about the process efficiencies all day, but I won't. One of the other topics we were going to touch on is about drone rules and regulations. So I'm certainly not a specialist in these kind of topics, but what are your thoughts about the current drone rules and regulations in the UK and maybe globally, and how they compare, and what challenges you've had?
I think so. The underlying message is the rate of change of legislation is just forever increasing. Well, when I started, there's a thing called a PIVCO, a permission for commercial operations. So it's quite distinct. You had people like myself who want to be commercial operators, and you had the hobby flyers, and there were sort of different rules for both. The CEA have sort of migrated from that over 10 years to more of a risk-based regulatory regime. And unfortunately, the unintended consequences, they've made it too complex. There's lots and lots of different rules and regulations affecting different weights of drones, where you are, whether you're in a town centre, whether you're in an open field. And I'd put money on it that over 50% of drone operators don't know what rules they're operating under. So a lot of people have either left being a commercial drone operator and migrated to using very small drones, which are under 250 grams, where the rules are a lot easier. And those drones are very capable. And at the other extreme, you've got people doing the more complex stuff, where you want to go beyond line of sight and you want to fly closer to people, are having to obtain what they call an operational safety case, which it's a bit like trying to get planning permission for something a bit tricky. It takes months, if not a year or two, to get the permission. And in that time frame, the regs have changed. So you've now got to do something else to get the permission. And I think that's the worry. It's getting, the rules have got so complex that it's putting people off.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, without knowing it, the 250-gram limit, I assume, is if it falls out of the sky, then it won't kill somebody. This is the obvious. Yeah.
So if I'm doing a town centre roof inspection, I can take my little 250-gram drone and I can get it out on the middle of the high street, fly it, take all the pictures I need, and I can do that quite safely. As you said, it's down to mass. It's down to how big the physical drone is and how little damage it would do or no damage it would do if it hit something. That's what it's all down to. Conversely, if you're delivering a parcel with a 50 kilo or 25 kilo drone, you do want to keep away from people because they're a different beast. And a lot of the legislation, there's a consultation paper out at the moment on future flight, they called it, which is all geared up to how we're going to embrace parcel deliveries, bigger drone movements, opening up the air, opening up the skies to more intense drone use. And that's ongoing at the moment because they do foresee that drone deliveries will happen.
Yes, it's complex, isn't it? I was just thinking, oh, maybe they could have like flight corridors, but then that sort of defeats the point of having a drone if you have to fly within a corridor. You know what I mean? I mean a narrow corridor.
Yes.
Because then the efficiencies of having a drone are then probably go out the window. You could argue you might as well just use some other type of vehicle. But yeah, no, it's interesting. And of course, we don't have to touch on other countries, but I would imagine it's very different in some other countries like the US, for example.
Just to quickly show you, that is a 250-gram drone, so it fits in my hand.
Oh, wow.
And that's got a full 4K camera on it. And you can take, roof inspections. It's absolutely ideal.
I suppose one thought. Well, I was going to say it's a waiting game until obviously the weight will come down and down and down, but it's not really a waiting game because you're holding one. You've got one. Do you know what I mean? The technology is now there that you can have a 250-gram or less that is more than capable of most things. I mean, but your point about the packages, the delivery, I guess that you could argue that is a different scenario. But
there's a couple of other aspects to it. The CEA are looking, as are the FAA in the States, of having effectively equipment on the drone which identifies its location the whole time. So it's called ADB out, it's called. So the drone sends a signal every few seconds saying, I'm here. And if you've got the right frequency as somebody picking up that data, you can collect that data and you know where that drone is. And in America, they're looking at every drone should have that equipment on it. So you'll have literally tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of drones flying around, which somebody will know where they are. And it's got slightly tricky because they then say, well, they could audit your flight 6 months later saying, well, you went beyond the rules you're allowed to fly in and all those sort of things. But you've got all sorts of rules and ideas coming through. But then the other aspect of it is how on earth do they police it all? Because actually, in reality, there's been very, very few drone accidents where a drone has hit somebody and injured somebody. There has been one or two, but they are very, very small number. I mean, less than 1%, but less of a fraction of percent of all flights have landed up in a problem. And you do get quite a variation in rules. So I've got one particular drone. It's a big fixed wing drone. It's big. It's 1.2 meters wide, but it only weighs 1.6 kilos. It's effectively a foam structure with a camera in it. I can't fly that over a city in the UK. I can, but I've got to do loads of hoops and jumps to do it. Ironically, I could take that drone to America. I could sit my what's called Part 107 license, which I could probably get in a fortnight, and I could fly that over Chicago. You know, you could fly over a city because globally, this drone has passed or surpassed loads of safety regulations, and it's deemed to be a very, very safe drone. It's got CE markings to demonstrate its compliance with various safety rules. So different countries are all working at different speeds and adopting drone technology quicker than others.
Yeah, it's interesting. Is there an international regulator or authority on drones?
Yeah, yes, there is. There's a thing called EASA, which covers the whole of Europe, but everybody's using the Brexit excuse. Well, since we came out of Europe, we can't use their rules. So the CEA effectively rewriting them themselves. And the CEA reports the DFT, so it's all wrapped up in a couple of government departments.
Okay, so ultimately in the United Kingdom, it's Department for Transport at the top level. Okay, yeah.
I think the worry is with a lot of people, the complexity of the rules and regs will put off a lot of newer entrants, and you want the younger, bright ones coming through who are really going to push the ideas and do things, and they're thinking, hang about, this is complicated to get into. There's quite a few barriers of entry. If I want to start doing the techie stuff, I'll go and find something else to do. And one or two people are saying that there are companies out there who have looked at drones or they're in the drone sector, but are just not investing anymore because the regulatory side of it is so uncertain.
Jeremy, I mean, we'll move away from the rules and regulations in a moment, but just one question, or just your thoughts, really. Do you think the industry bodies could help or do more? So again, for the benefit of people, particularly outside the UK, I mean, CICS, Chartered Institution of Civil Engineers Surveyors, RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and the TSA, the Survey Association. Do you think they could, what are they doing, and do you think they could do more to help people?
Yeah, they are doing some. I'm not sure what TSA are doing. I've been involved with a couple of RICS projects, and I got involved writing a couple of papers on drone use, some of the guidance. But I don't think it's up there in terms of being sort of key things on the RICS's agenda. Or you're probably right, actually. Collectively, bodies need to get together a bit more. I'm a member of a thing called RPAS, which effectively is a UK trade association for drone operators, but their membership isn't huge. There's probably 3,000 or 4,000 active commercial operators, and they don't speak with one voice. And I think that's probably an issue. It's getting that coverage, isn't it?
Sorry, Jeremy. Maybe there's an opportunity there, particularly for something like Geo Business to be followed. This podcast isn't commercially loaded, but nevertheless, who knows? Yeah. There could be a session, couldn't there, on these challenges, sort of entry into the world of drones. And just before we move off that, is the right word in the UK drones, or do we say UAVs, UASs? I am being serious because sometimes I get called out for saying drones in certain meetings. Yeah. What do you say?
Yeah, I say drones. But if I'm speaking to a technical group or RPAS, I'd say UAVs. I think man in the street knows drones, doesn't he? If you said, what's a UAS? I said, what is a UAS? I haven't got a clue what you're on about.
Unmanned aerial system, for the benefit of people listening and watching. Yeah. I've of course, it fascinates me, all this jargon. Of course, I mentioned GIS several times. Most people will know what that is, but for their geographic information systems, just in case. I wouldn't necessarily dwell on the particular softwares and for example, but nevertheless, you mentioned Matterport. So I thought, in fairness, just very briefly, if you could just outline the software. You talked about the workflow, and you didn't mention the softwares. Just for people new to this, what softwares do you use in your normal processing workflow?
I use two different software applications for processing photogrammetry. I use Esri's Drone to Map, and I use a product called Pix4D. Pix4D's probably got the biggest user base of all the photogrammetry apps. There's another one called Agisoft, which is very good, but I tend to use Pix4D. So I process all the data through one of those two. They both do a good job. And one of the benefits of Drone to Map, once you've actually processed it all, one button click and it chucks all the data into Art Pro. So it's quite seamless integrating it all. When I've got the outputs from either of those two products, you can do analysis within that software package, but I don't. I take it out, and if I'm manipulating point clouds and I'm editing point clouds, doing cut and fill volumes, I use a product called Global Mapper, which is a US-based GIS company, and their software is absolutely brilliant at managing point clouds. It's fantastic, and it's a very, very good price compared with lots of other software. Ironically, I don't. If the client wants PDFs and AO plans, I take all my outputs and put it back into Art Pro, because Art Pro is so good at managing all the GIS data and all the layers and all the information. And because I've been using ArcGIS for 20 odd years, I'm just familiar with maps, layouts, and how to get those outputs efficiently to the client. The other aspect is that clients over the last few years now want more and more online data. And I've tried all sorts of different ways, but I now revert to ArcGIS Online. So I set up map portals for clients. I have to thin down the data quite a lot, particularly when I'm exporting big files like orthomosaics. But ArcGIS handles that pretty well. So I import it all into ArcGIS, set up a portal. They have online access to it, and they can, for example, view the last 4 orthomosaics, compare one with the other, switch layers on and off, all the usual things which GIS has the advantage of.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. I just wanted people to get an impression of, the processing is the tricky bit, right? And then and then thank you for mentioning at the end the way it's shared as well, because again, that's where. Yeah. Sometimes not us, but some people don't go far enough. They only go up to the PDF in their mind or a laser scan. You're providing online authenticated. People can log in and look at their
A lot of the construction companies purely work in CAD. A lot of the clients I go to, they wouldn't know what GIS is. And that's one thing which does surprise me, because I've done a couple of jobs where I've supplied, for example, drone-derived data on a proposed residential development site. I've then been asked to share the orthomosaic, for example, with the design team, the ecologists, whoever it might be, 1 or 2 others. I've quite often then, via that process, got data back. So I've now got, for example, an orthomosaic of a greenfield site. I've created a I've got a surface model of it. I get their CAD data and I drop it on top. And to give you a good example, I did one recently. So I dropped on the utility. So I had a pipeline crossing it and a power cable. And then the third element to it is I dropped on some ecology data. So that on this particular site, there was inevitable badgers on it. So plotted all those three, and I took it to the meeting just for my own benefit. GIS sat in front of me on my, so I could understand what everybody was talking about. And when I showed it on screen, and this is 2022, 23, how do you do that? And there's still, I mean, I find it staggering. There's still a lack of awareness of the sheer capability of GIS.
Jeremy, well,
I'm speaking to the well converted, but you know what I mean. It's just surprisingly that people don't realize how much you can manipulate and manage data within the GIS environment.
Well, I'm the converted, as you know, but yeah, people listening and watching this may not be familiar. I mean, I guess what do you think we can do about it? I mean, I've sort of taken more than a sideward step, sort of with GIS, and intentionally talk to people that don't know what it is. So that's a big part of it. But a lot of people, is it because we're still stuck in different domains? There's maybe still jargon, or what do you think we can do to improve GIS awareness? Just to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one because I think a lot of people are entrenched and they don't like change. If you've been working with CAD for 20 years, they probably don't want to use GIS as much as I don't want to use CAD. You know, it's just what you're used to. So I think there's a large element where we've always worked in CAD. So we want all of our data in CAD. We don't want point clouds. Can you send us a grid? Can you keep it nice and simple for us? And you've got the GIS camp over here who I think doing some really innovative, clever stuff. And there's a big gulf in the middle. Some of the clever things, which are not new, you can take orthomosaics now from a drone survey and convert that into a CAD drawing pretty quickly. I use this. I mentioned Pix4D as part of their software suite. They do Pix4D survey, and that allows you to take an orthomosaic. So if you take a classic, you've got a curb line on the edge of a highway. Well, 10 years ago, you would digitize quite carefully along the bottom of the curve, which would take forever. Well, now you put your cursor at one point, you put it at another one, and it interprets it and it draws a line for you. So you can create CAD data very quickly from LiDAR or photogrammetry. And it's things like that which are helping. But yeah, it's awareness training. Yeah,
of course, yeah. I completely agree with that. And the other thing, I wouldn't normally mention the tools, but just to say there is obviously strategic partnerships between, for example, Esri and Autodesk, for example, in the background. So this interoperability in the background, as it were, as far as the users are concerned. I mean, we've known about data conversion for a long time. For example, FME by Safe Software, or the data interoperability extension in the ArcGIS product. But anyway, so again, I'm just naming these for people listening and watching. Say, well, we've always been able to convert the data. It's easier than ever now, and there are things going on that maybe people aren't aware of to try and automate this workflow. So I'm nearly at the end of my time with you, Jeremy. It's completely flown by. No pun intended. That was a good pun there, wasn't it? I should write that down. But normally I end these obviously by thanking you. Thanks so much for your time and your insights. It's fascinating, and I've certainly learned things. I'm not a specialist in drones, so it's things to think about. And normally what I end with is there anything you would recommend people to look up either online? So it could be either websites or references to read, or even physical events to go to. Is there maybe just a few things you'd recommend people to look up or attend? I know there's hundreds, but what do you reckon? Top 3 or 4?
Well, I always actually think which we always go to is the Esri user conference. Because if you're not interested or don't understand GIS, you'll learn a huge amount by one day going to the Esri user conference, because some of the case studies there are quite something. the Geo events. I mean, I know they're Excel now. There's a 2-day event there, which is held in May every year. That's another fantastic event where you can learn a lot. There's lots of workshops, lots of interesting things going on. So they're probably my top 2. Some of the other ones get quite technical. You're not getting that broad coverage.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. So yeah, Geo Business, I'll obviously send a link, put a link at the bottom, but thanks so much. Anything else we've mentioned in passing? Maybe even I might refer to some of the regulations, for example, if people want to swat up on the current state, I will link to them. But yeah, thanks so much for your time. I'm sure we could keep going, so we need to do a part 2, no doubt. But I'll thank you for today anyway, and thanks so much for your time, Jeremy Murfitt.
Yeah, thanks very much. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.